As I'm panning to one direction, I caught out of the corner of my eye something move, and I quickly looked back over, and I could see a Jeep that was just sort of barreling down the hillside. Something we don't talk a lot about these days are miracles. And let me just tell you, based on my experience, I believe that God still works miracles today. So I was hiking the desert segment of the Pacific Crest Trail. It goes from Mexico to the southern Sierra Nevada mountain range, Tehachapi area. It's well over, I think, 700 miles. And when you get in the backcountry, especially in the desert, water can be scarce. I have a lot of experience hiking in the desert, but nevertheless, things can still happen. You can plan for your water sources. You can avail yourself of all kinds of different resources. You can plan to the hilt, but invariably things happen. And I think this is indicative of how life works too, right? You can plan your life, but then life happens and things don't go the way that you plan. So what do? Sometimes you find yourself in dangerous situations. And I know what I'm talking about because I've actually pushed myself to the limit in the desert at times, and it's landed me in the hospital. I've been hospitalized for several days due to dehydration and heat exhaustion, and in fact I learned that my kidneys were failing at one point. So I have an acute sense of sensitivity to making sure that I am listening to my body and so forth, but nevertheless things happen. And so on this particular day, I was trying to do about 25 miles and there were only a couple of water sources. The water carries can be 30, 40 miles in some places in the desert. For this particular day, there were a couple of water sources that I was relying on. One of them was a water cache where somebody comes and drops water for hikers. You don't really want to rely on these, but it's really all that I could sort of count on. And then the last source was the one close to where I was going to camp that night, around 25 miles in. When I came to that first water source, there was indeed a cache, but it wasn't as much as I had heard. And I had a decision to make. Do I just take all the water that's there for myself because I know I'm going to need it? Or do I leave some for the hikers that are coming after me? I opted for the latter, and I took just what I needed. But even with rationing that, I depleted it rather quickly. And so I had about 15 miles or so to go until I came to the next water source. So I set up camp, and this water source was up a dry creek bed. It was a 2-mile round trip hike, so I had to add even more mileage to my day just to get to this water source. Supposedly there was a pool of water there that was semi-reliable, but when I got there, it was dry. So I walked back and I sat on a log in front of my tent, and the sun was starting to set at this point. And I was trying not to allow my anxiety to take over, but I could feel it starting to rise. And at that point, I cried out to the God of Elijah, and I said, God, come to my assistance. Lord, make haste to help me. Amen. And just as soon as I said amen, I heard this sound. It was kind of faint, but over the course of several minutes, it just started getting louder and louder. And it's hard to replicate it with my human voice, but it sounded kind of like this. And it was getting louder and louder. I couldn't tell, was it an animal? Was it some sort of human-made noise? And as I was panning the hillside, because there weren't any roads, this was just desert, yucca and manzanita and typical Southern California desert environment. As I'm panning to one direction, I caught out of the corner of my eye something move, and I quickly looked back over, and I could see a Jeep that was just sort of barreling down the hillside. And there was a man's arm that was outside, and he was like waving at me. Well, I immediately jumped up and I started waving both hands. I'm like, come on over. And he pulls over and he gets out of the Jeep, and I said, what are you doing here? And he said, funny thing, I just felt the urge to get in my Jeep and go on a drive today. I said, have you ever done that before? He said, Nope. I said, well, do you have any water? And he said, oh, do I have water? And we went in the back of his Jeep and he had gallons of water there. He's like, take as much as you want. So I took it out, and I put it over there around my tent, and I said, sir, I don't know if you're a man of faith, but you're an answer to my prayer. You are a true trail angel. And he said, well, I don't know about any of that. Have a good day. And he jumped in his Jeep and he just drove off. Went on his way, and I just watched the dust behind him and he disappeared. And I dropped to my knees and I said, the God of Elijah has heard me. And I shared that story with people after my hike, and it was a way to witness and to bear testimony to the goodness of God, and that God still works miracles today. I am Erik Carter, and this is my story.
I'm Pastor Tara Van Cross, and we're so glad that you've tuned into our Azure Hills Church YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe, and click on the bell so that you'll be notified every time we share new videos. We are so glad that you're here. Until next time, please know that we're praying for you as you continue to be a voice of hope.